In ancient Rome, the most dangerous crime a woman could commit was trying to claim her own freedom. Rome didn't just punish runaways. It hunted them, marked them, and made their suffering a spectacle. In ancient Rome, the act of escape was never a simple attempt to run from an enslaver. It was treated as an attack on the very spine of Roman authority. In a society built on hierarchy, power, and absolute control over the bodies it owned, a fleeing enslaved woman represented something far more dangerous than disobedience. She embodied the possibility of defiance. For women who dared to flee, one of the first punishments they faced was branding. Not a symbolic mark, not a small, discreet burn. It was a glowing iron pressed against living flesh, long enough for the sizzle to fill the room, and long enough for the smell of scorched skin to linger in the air. A violent ritual meant to scar not only the body, but the spirit. Rome refined this act into a message. You may run, but your body will forever carry the proof that you tried. The branding was almost always placed on the forehead. Rome understood the psychological impact of visibility. A woman could hide shame, but she could not hide this. The letters carved into her skin, FVG for fugitivus, told everyone who she was and what she had done. Sometimes the brand spelled out an entire sentence, a taunt burned into her flesh. I hold you, fugitive. A sentence she never spoke, but one her body repeated for the rest of her life. Branding was designed to turn a woman into a warning. The marked forehead was a message to every enslaved person in the household and beyond. This is the price of running. The woman who bore the scar was not just property. She was damaged property. A body that had dared to challenge its owner's authority and had lost. Even if she tried to blend in with freeborn Romans, dressing modestly, keeping her eyes low, moving quietly, the iron had already spoken for her. The scar dragged her back into the role Rome had assigned. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a life sentence. Branding was nearly always public. The humiliation was part of the punishment. A crowd might gather. Household slaves might be forced to watch. Insults were shouted. Sometimes beatings were added to intensify the spectacle. The pain from the iron was sharp and immediate, but the real punishment lay in the aftermath. The scar never disappeared. The shame attached to it never softened. For Roman women, appearance was tied to dignity. Their bodies were controlled, scrutinized, judged. A permanent disfigurement, especially on the face, was a direct attack on the core of their identity. Rome understood that humiliation could carve deeper than pain. Sometimes the branding took place while the woman was held down, restrained by multiple hands, arms pinned back, hair pulled tight. She might beg, she might cry, she might struggle, but the iron always found its mark, and Rome made sure those who watched remembered that moment. This was not rare, it was not shocking, it was routine. Roman law did not soften for women or for the enslaved. Women carried unique vulnerabilities, forced labor, exploitation, and punishments that targeted not just their bodies, but their ability to resist, their sense of self, their will to survive. And for many, the next punishment was even worse. Chaining at the gate. This penalty was designed as pure humiliation. It wasn't enough for Rome to punish disobedience. Rome needed witnesses. Rome needed fear. And nothing communicated that more clearly than a woman chained to the entrance of the household, where every visitor, every slave, every passerby would see her. In Roman culture, the doorway of a domus was sacred. It was the threshold between public and private, between honor inside and judgment outside. To place a woman there in chains was to strip her of humanity and transform her into a living piece of architecture. She became a symbol of punishment woven into the home's identity. There, exposed to the elements, she might stand for hours, for days, sometimes longer. Rain soaked her hair, sun burned her skin, wind cut through her clothing. Iron shackles rubbed her wrists raw. If she tried to sit, the chains bit into her body. If she cried out, the sound carried into the street. The message was unmistakable. This is what becomes of those who attempt to flee. For enslaved women, the humiliation was layered. Roman society tied a woman's virtue to modesty. Being displayed at the gate, restrained, sometimes partially undressed, was itself a form of violence. It broadcast vulnerability in a world where dignity was already scarce. Worse still, chained women were sometimes denied food or water as part of the punishment. Roman comedies, often exaggerated but rooted in truth, joked about slaves left starving at the door. Archaeological evidence supports the reality behind the jokes. Iron shackles, fixation points on entry columns, even remnants of restraints buried under collapsed homes. This was not an isolated cruelty. It was embedded into the rhythm of Roman daily life. In an empire that thrived on visibility, to be turned into an object at the threshold of private life was one of the most psychologically crushing punishments a woman could endure. But Rome did not stop there. For some women, the punishment moved from the gate to the arena, a place where suffering became entertainment. Among the most brutal penalties imposed on enslaved women who attempted escape was their forced participation in the arena. Most people imagine gladiators, armored men clashing in heroic combat, but Rome's spectacles were much darker, much more complex. Escaped enslaved women, especially those labeled as defiant or dangerous, could be condemned under the sentence of condemnation to the beasts, a legal penalty reserved for those the state wanted to erase in the most public, most terrifying manner possible. These women were not combatants. They were victims. Their deaths were crafted for spectacle, a form of entertainment that blurred punishment, violence, and performance. A woman might be stripped, bound, and left unarmed on the arena floor. The gate would open, a lion or leopard, starved for days, would be released. The crowd roared not with empathy, but with anticipation. Children sat beside their parents, watching as a life was extinguished in dust and blood. Sometimes the execution followed a theme. Romans loved mythological reenactments. A woman might be forced to play a tragic figure from legend. Prometheus, Orpheus, Pasiphae, roles twisted into cruelty. Actors pretended to be gods. Real victims died in their place. Some women were burned alive. Others were forced to fight one another with sticks or blunt weapons, pushed into desperation for the amusement of tens of thousands. They were not trained. They were not prepared. Their deaths were not battles. They were sentences carried out with theatrical flair. Records by historians, such as Cassius Dio and Suetonius, note the presence of women in the arena. They focus more on elite women or female fighters, but legal texts make clear that enslaved women, especially those who fled repeatedly, could be executed publicly. Their deaths sent a message that echoed through the empire. Escape is not simply disobedience, it is rebellion, and rebellion is punished with erasure. These women were turned into warnings, silenced through blood, their last moments swallowed by applause. But Rome still had more weapons. One of its oldest, most familiar tools was the whip. In ancient Rome, the whip was more than an instrument. It was a symbol, a mark of ownership, a reminder of who held the power and who lived at their mercy. For enslaved women who fled, whipping was one of the most frequent punishments. It served not only to inflict pain, but to restore control. A runaway was considered a threat to the household. A woman who dared to run had to be broken back into obedience. The flagram, a multi-thonged whip often weighted with metal or bone, was the preferred tool. It tore skin. It broke flesh. A single strike could leave deep wounds. Repeated lashes could cripple. The punishment required no court, no oversight, no limit. The enslaver decided when to start and when to stop. Sometimes the whipping took place in private. A dark room, a locked door, the crack of leather echoing off stone. Other times it was deliberately public. Slaves were made to watch. The screams of the punished woman were meant to travel, to be heard, to cut through the household like a warning. For women, the punishment often carried an added layer of degradation. Torn clothing, forced exposure, verbal humiliation layered over physical agony. The goal was not simply to hurt, it was to erase defiance, identity, and dignity in a single event. In markets, workshops, or courtyards, a woman might be left collapsed on the ground, garments ripped, skin torn, her punishment displayed for others. Rome did not consider this excessive. It considered it correction. Writers like Juvenal, Horace, and Petronius referenced whippings with casual detachment. Their works, satirical or not, reflect a society desensitized to brutality. Violence was woven into the architecture of Roman enslavement. The whip was always close, its sound always understood. For some women, whipping was only the beginning, a prelude to deeper punishment. Because the final sentence Rome could impose on a runaway woman was the mines. One of the most feared punishments in the Roman world was deportation to the mines. For enslaved women who attempted to flee, this was not a sentence of labor. It was a sentence of slow death. The mines of Noricum, Dacia, Sardinia, and Spain were places of dust, darkness, and collapse. Air thick with metal particles, passages narrow enough to bend the spine, tools primitive, overseers ruthless. Women sent there faced the same grueling labor as men, hauling stone, crushing ore, clearing debris, but with the added vulnerability of sexual abuse and exploitation. There was no escape, no oversight, no hope of return. Most who entered the mines never left. The sentence was almost always lifelong. Some women died from exhaustion, others from injury. Some simply vanished into the tunnels, their names swallowed by darkness. Pregnant women were not spared. Some gave birth underground. Their infants died hours later from cold or neglect. The mines erased lives quietly, far from the spectacle of the arena, but with suffering no less real. Rome designed this punishment to disappear people. A woman condemned to the mines was not meant to be seen again. Her absence was the message. The punishments Rome imposed on enslaved runaway women, branding, chaining, the arena, the scourge, and the mines, revealed an empire willing to sacrifice human dignity to preserve its order. They revealed a society built on domination, where pain became architecture and suffering became law. And they remind us that coercion, once normalized, can echo across centuries. Which Roman penalty most starkly illustrates the extremes of human rule versus resistance? As Seneca warned long ago, they are slaves? No, they are human beings. The brutality of Roman punishment did not emerge from chaos. It rose from a carefully cultivated belief that fear must sit at the center of power. Rome mastered the art of control by perfecting the architecture of terror. Every punishment, every scar, every public display carried a deeper intent: to shape behavior, to crush rebellion, and to remind the enslaved that their bodies were never truly their own. But beneath the empire's vast system of punishment lay quieter stories. Stories of women who resisted in ways Rome failed to fully understand. Resistance in ancient Rome did not always mean revolt. Sometimes it meant whispering to another enslaved woman in the dark. Sometimes it meant refusing to break under the whip. Sometimes it meant running, not once, but again and again. Each escape a reminder that the human spirit was harder to chain than any wrist. Enslaved women faced unique burdens, yet they also cultivated forms of resilience that Rome could not stamp out. Some developed networks of support inside large households, sharing food, clothes, or warnings about punishments. Others used skills, cooking, weaving, healing, to become indispensable, gaining small pockets of leverage. And some, in the quiet desperation of night, planned their escapes with the same precision Rome used to plan its punishments. It was this resilience that terrified Rome. A runaway slave was not just property in flight. She was an idea. One woman fleeing suggested that all could flee. One woman resisting suggested that obedience was not natural, but enforced. And so the punishments grew harsher. Yet even the harshest sentences did not fully extinguish resistance. Some women who were branded with FVG marks found ways to conceal them beneath cloth or jewelry. Some who were chained at the gate dug their heels into the ground, refusing to cry before the passers-by. Some who were sent to the arena stood tall even when stripped and bound, their posture a final act of defiance. And some in the mines whispered stories to each other in the dark, reminding one another that they were not alone, not forgotten, not broken. Rome feared this spirit, perhaps more than anything else. The empire preferred order, rigid, predictable, absolute. Women who resisted threatened to unravel that order, and so Rome created systems to track them. Informants who patrolled the streets, overseers who memorized faces, slavers who trained dogs to follow scents. Notices posted at markets describing runaway women with chilling detail: height, scars, hairstyle, clothing, even mannerisms. These descriptions circulated like wanted posters, offering rewards to anyone who captured them. A runaway woman was hunted. If caught, she might be dragged back through the city with ropes around her wrists or neck. The journey home was a parade of shame, intended to erase the courage that made her flee. People jeered, some spat, others simply stared. For Rome, the capture was not enough. It had to be witnessed. If she resisted during recapture, screamed, fought, bit, kicked, the punishment intensified. The logic was simple. Rebellion must be met with spectacle, and the greater the spectacle, the stronger the message. It was not uncommon for a woman to be beaten before even reaching the household. Some overseers, eager to prove their discipline, struck her in public streets, forcing her to stumble through the city bruised and bleeding. Loved ones in the enslaved community, powerless to intervene, watched with dread, wondering if they might be next. Inside the household, the enslaver decided her fate. Some unleashed immediate violence. Others preferred to wait, carefully constructing punishments that would crush her will. But one truth remained constant across the empire. Rome viewed escape as defiance, and defiance required correction.